You stand at the edge of the invisible. You feel everything, every flicker of tension in the air, every tremor in another's voice, every wave of emotion that doesn't belong to you, but somehow moves through you as though it were born inside your skin. You call it empathy. The world calls it sensitivity. But I call it the forgotten inheritance of the unconscious, a power that once belonged to the mystics, now scattered across millions of weary souls who mistake absorption for compassion. Empathy, when misunderstood, become possession. You are not merely feeling with others, you are carrying them. You wear their pain as though it were your duty. You confuse their chaos for your calling, and somewhere along the line, you forget where your energy ends and theirs begins. This is the tragedy of the modern empath, the individual whose psyche has become a sponge for the world's unresolved suffering. The ancients knew that the boundary between souls is thin. They called it the veil, the liminal space where intuition whispers. But in our time, the veil is torn wide open. Without symbolic understanding, without ritual containment, people wander into each other's psychic fields as easily as breathing. The empath becomes the unwitting priest absorbing collective shadow without knowing how to transmute it. And so the body collapses under the unseen weight. The nervous system tightens. The gut churns with emotions that never originated there. You may think you are anxious, but what if you are simply processing the world's anxiety through your own nervous system? What if the panic is not yours, but borrowed from the collective unconscious? Let me tell you something from the depths of analytic experience. Intuition is not the same as overload. True intuition arises from the quiet depths of the self, that timeless center that speaks through symbols, dreams, and sudden knowing. Overload, on the other hand, is when your consciousness is flooded by unintegrated energies that belong to others. The difference between the two is a difference between listening to God and drowning in the noise of the crowd. The empath, by nature, is a threshold, being half in this world, half in another. You perceive the invisible architecture of emotions. You intuit motives. You sense pain behind smiles. This sensitivity, if purified through awareness, becomes wisdom. But if you do not understand it, it becomes torment. Your gift turns against you. In my years of studying the psyche, I observed that many so-called empaths are actually those whose early life demanded hyper-attunement to others. A child growing up amidst emotional storms learns to read every subtle signal to survive. This adaptation, meant to protect the child, becomes a psychic reflex that extends into adulthood. You call it empathy, but it is really vigilance. A deep-rooted need to monitor others' emotions to ensure safety. Thus begins the confusion. Your nervous system becomes a living antenna, constantly scanning, constantly absorbing, unable to rest. This is not intuition. This is survival. The empath's gift is often born from trauma, but it is not meant to remain enslaved to it. When you take on what is not yours, your psyche begins to blur its sacred boundaries. The unconscious no longer knows where the self ends and the other begins. You become possessed by the moods of others. The archetype of the wounded healer takes hold. You begin to enact the ancient story of Chiron, the centaur who could heal everyone but himself. But there is a deeper truth. The empath must learn to return what is not theirs. The art of psychic return is the art of individuation itself, reclaiming one's energy, one's emotional sovereignty, one's sacred center. You cannot become whole if you are constantly leaking vitality into the collective wounds of others. To return what isn't yours, you must first recognize what isn't yours. This recognition begins with sensation, when the body feels heavy, when the mind fogs, when an unexplained sadness seeps in. Pause. Do not analyze. Simply ask, is this mine? The question itself invites the unconscious to speak. It pierces through the illusion of ownership. If the emotion lifts after you ask, it was never yours. You were merely hosting it. But the modern mind resists such ideas because it fears the invisible. Yet in my work, I found that what people call intuition is often the psyche's capacity to perceive psychic energy in symbolic form. The empath's intuition then is not merely emotional, it is archetypal. You are perceiving patterns in others that resonate with archetypes within yourself. When you sense another's pain, it is because your own inner wounded child or your inner healer recognizes itself. What you feel in others is what is activated in you. The unconscious speaks through resonance. Two tuning forks vibrate in sympathy because they share the same frequency. Likewise, you resonate with the energies you have not yet integrated. The more shadow you carry, unacknowledged, the more you will attract others who embody it externally. You think you are empathizing, but you are mirroring. Empathy without consciousness becomes entanglement. You drown in their sea because you never realized that their waters are your own. Refracted through a different phase, the nervous system becomes the battlefield between the self and the world. To reset this nervous system, you must learn the ancient alchemy of differentiation. Imagine yourself standing in a circle of light. This is not a fantasy. It is a symbolic act. The psyche understands symbols better than logic. Say within yourself, what belongs to me returns to me. What does not belong to me, I release with love. Oh, you will feel the body shift, the breath deepens, the vibration steadies. This is not magic. It is consciousness reclaiming its boundaries. The unconscious responds to intention, the way a forest responds to rain, silently but powerfully. And then comes the real work to understand why you allowed the world to invade you in the first place. Many empaths carry an unconscious belief that love equals carrying others' burdens. This is a distortion of compassion. Real love does not absorb, it illuminates. The sun warms everything it touches, yet it never becomes what it shines upon. Your task is not to suffer with others, but to remain radiant in their presence. The nervous system of a conscious empath is not a sponge, it is a mirror. It reflects, but does not retain. In dreams, I have seen empaths represented as trees with roots tangled among the roots of others, unable to stand upright, their trunks bent under invisible weight. When they begin to individuate, the dream changes. The roots untangle, the tree rises, the forest remains connected, but each tree stands sovereign. This is the image of healed empathy, interconnected but not enmeshed. What you call intuition is the psyche's ability to interpret archetypal signals before they reach consciousness. When you feel an inexplicable pull towards someone, it is often your unconscious recognizing a familiar pattern, a shadow to be integrated, a lesson to be learned. If you do not listen, the pattern repeats. You mistake karmic recognition for empathy. You say, I feel drawn to them because I understand their pain. But what you are truly saying is, I see my unhealed self in them. This is why so many empaths find themselves in relationships with those who drain them. They are unconsciously seeking to heal their own unresolved archetypes through others. But this is the path of projection, not transformation. To transcend projection, one must descend into solitude. Solitude is not loneliness, it is communion with the self. In solitude, the empath learns to discern between the voice of intuition and the noise of absorption. The true voice is calm, symbolic, rooted in stillness. The false voice is anxious, urgent, emotionally turbulent. In the silence of the soul, you begin to sense the presence of the self, that vast inner intelligence that has no need to fix, only to understand. It is from this center that intuition speaks. It does not overwhelm, it clarifies. It does not drain, it renews. To return what is not yours is to stop identifying with what is not eternal. You are not every emotion that passes through you. You are the awareness through which emotion flows. When you realize this, the nervous system resets naturally. You no longer need to build walls. The boundary becomes energetic, organic, intelligent. In that state, you can walk into a storm and remain still inside. You can touch another's sorrow without becoming its vessel. You can sense darkness without fearing it. This is not detachment, it is mastery. The empath who learns this becomes a bridge between worlds. You do not reject the collective, you transmute it. You return what isn't yours, not with bitterness, but with understanding. You hand it back to the great unconscious, saying, this pain is not mine alone, but ours, and I will no longer carry it unconsciously. Now, when you do this, you are no longer the wounded healer. You are the conscious healer, one who transforms empathy into wisdom, intuition into knowing, and overload into power. When I speak of archetypes, I do not mean abstract concepts buried in philosophy books. I mean living forces that breathe beneath your skin. They move within the collective unconscious like tides under the surface of the ocean, unseen, yet capable of shifting entire continents of thought and emotion. Every empath lives among these currents, but few recognize what truly pulls them under. You think you are drowning in another's emotions, but in truth, you are being pulled by an archetype that has awakened within you. The psyche speaks in symbols, and archetypes are its language. The healer, the martyr, the mother, the savior. These are not ideas. They are instinctual energies that seek expression. When you meet someone suffering, the archetype of the healer rises within you. It whispers, save them, absorb their pain, sacrifice your peace for their healing. And because it feels sacred, you obey, but you do not realize that the archetype has seized your will in the unconscious. Every archetype contains both light and shadow. The light of the healer brings compassion, intuition, and love. Its shadow brings exhaustion, guilt, and entanglement. When you cannot stop yourself from fixing everyone, when your worth depends on the relief of others, you have fallen into the archetype's possession. You are no longer acting from choice, you are being acted upon. To the empath, this possession feels noble. You mistake depletion for devotion. You call it love. But love that consumes the self is not love. It is unconscious servitude to the archetype. You see, archetypes are like ancient gods. They do not care for your comfort. They demand expression. If you serve them unconsciously, they drain you. If you serve them consciously, they ennoble you. The difference is awareness. When awareness dawns, the archetype ceases to control and begins to cooperate. You can feel compassion without being conquered by it. You can sense pain without carrying it. You can be the healer without being its victim. There is an ancient alchemical law. Solve et coagula, dissolve and reconstitute. This is the secret of psychic purification. You must dissolve what is not truly you, the emotional residues, the inherited guilt, the archetypal compulsions, so that what remains is pure essence, the clear light of the self. To perform this purification, do not seek to escape the world's emotions. Instead, bring them into awareness. Sit with the sensations in your body that come when you are near suffering. Do not rush to fix them. Observe. Ask yourself, which archetype is moving in me now? Perhaps you will feel the mother, the urge to cradle the wounded, or the savior, the compulsion to rescue, or the martyr, the voice that says, if I hurt, at least they will be safe. Do not fight these voices. Listen to them. They are the guardians of your evolution. They reveal the myths you have been unconsciously living. Every person is an unwritten myth, unfolding in time. The empath's myth is often one of redemption, trying to heal the world to compensate for childhood where no one healed them. But this is not your burden anymore. The moment you recognize it, the myth loses power. Recognition is exorcism. Awareness releases possession. When you name the archetype, you separate from it. You become the observer, the alchemist, the conscious participant in your own evolution. Let me give you an image from a patient's dream. For dreams are the language of the unconscious. A woman, constantly exhausted by others' emotions, dreamt she was standing in a river of black water, trying to save drowning figures. Each one she pulled out transformed into smoke and vanished. While she grew weaker, finally, a voice whispered, "Turn around." Behind her, the river led to a clear spring that shimmered with light. The figures had been reflections, not people. When she drank from the spring, the river dried and silence filled her. That dream was her unconscious teaching her. What she was trying to save was her own reflection in others. The smoke was projection, the illusion of external suffering that mirrored her own inner child's pain. When she turned inward, she found the true source of life, the self. The empath must turn around. You must see that what you feel in others is your own archetypal echo. When you feel the pain of abandonment, perhaps it is your inner child calling. When you feel the despair of another, it may be your hidden shadow longing for attention, to return what isn't yours. You must reclaim what is. This reclamation happens in the body. The nervous system is not separate from the soul. It is its instrument. When overloaded, it becomes a tangled web of ancient instincts: fight, flight, freeze, fawn. The empath often lives in the last of these: fawning, appeasing, absorbing, harmonizing. You call it kindness, but your body calls it fear. You must teach your body that safety does not depend on saving others. Place a hand on your chest and breathe slowly. Feel the heartbeat, the rhythm of your own life. Whisper inwardly, "I am safe in myself. The world's pain is not my command." The nervous system listens to the words of the soul. With each breath, the energy you borrowed begins to retreat. In analytical psychology, this is the process of withdrawal of projection. You withdraw your psychic energy from outer objects and reinvest it into your own self. The energy that once went toward fixing, pleasing, and absorbing now becomes available for transformation. What once was anxiety becomes intuition. What once was exhaustion becomes creativity. But beware, the moment you begin this reclamation, the unconscious will test you. Those around you may feel the withdrawal of your energy and react. They may say, "You have become distant or cold." Do not mistake their discomfort for moral failure. You are merely stepping out of the unconscious contract that bound you to their suffering. The empath's greatest challenge is to disappoint others without betraying the self. This is individuation, the sacred process of becoming whole. It is not a selfish act. It is the only act through which true compassion can emerge. When your nervous system is cleansed of borrowed emotions, your intuition becomes crystalline. You no longer guess others' feelings through fear. You perceive them through wisdom. You no longer absorb, you understand, and understanding heals far more deeply than sympathy ever could. Consider this. In ancient rituals of purification, priests would wash their hands not to remove physical dirt, but to symbolically separate themselves from the energies they had mediated. The gesture said, "What has passed through me returns to the source." You, too, must learn this ritual not with water, but with awareness. At the end of each day, say quietly, all energies that are not mine, I release to their origin in love. All that is mine, I keep in peace. Oh, you will feel the psyche respond. The dream life will shift. The nightmares of drowning, of being chased, of endless healing will begin to fade. In their place come dreams of clear waters, of boundaries restored, of walking freely among others without weight. Empathy, purified by consciousness, becomes intuition. Aligned with the self, you begin to sense not merely emotions but meanings. You feel the symbolic essence of life moving through everything, the same divine current that animates your heart and the stars. This is the higher octave of empathy, not to feel others' pain, but to perceive their archetypal journey and hold space for it without merging. When your nervous system is reset, silence becomes your teacher. You no longer need to explain your sensitivity or justify your withdrawal. You begin to live by inner timing. The self orchestrates encounters that resonate with your healed frequency. People who used to drain you simply fall away, not out of conflict, but out of dissonance. The psyche, now coherent, no longer magnetizes chaos. There is a story told among the mystics. A sage once carried a bowl of water up a mountain. On the way, the wind blew, dust swirled, insects fell in, and the water grew muddy. At the top, he sat down and waited. Without effort, the sediment sank, and the surface became clear again. The empath must do the same. The nervous system, once overwhelmed, will settle on its own if you stop stirring the waters with fear and guilt. This clarity is what allows intuition to arise. When the mind is silent, the self speaks. When you no longer confuse others' energy for your own, intuition becomes direct knowledge. You do not interpret. You simply know. The ancient Greeks called this gnosis, knowing through being, and in that knowing, you will realize a paradox. To truly connect with others, you must first disconnect from their unconscious projections. Only then can love flow freely, not as sympathy, not as sacrifice, but as presence. The empath who has integrated the shadow becomes a vessel of consciousness itself, radiating peace without effort. To return what isn't yours is not rejection, it is reverence. It honors the divine law that each soul must carry its own lessons. To take another's pain is to steal their initiation. To witness their pain with awareness is to help them awaken. When you reach this understanding, empathy transforms from suffering to service, from compulsion to grace. You become, as the mystics say, in the world, but not of it. The nervous system becomes a sacred instrument, finely tuned to the frequency of truth. And so I tell you, do not fear your sensitivity. It is not a curse, but an unrefined form of vision. Your task is to temper it with awareness, to shape it with discipline, to sanctify it through solitude, for in the end, What you call empathy is the soul's longing to remember its unity with all things, but unity without boundaries is dissolution. Love without consciousness becomes chaos. The self teaches balance through contrast. You must descend into the overload to discover the limits of your capacity. Only when you meet your edge can you learn to rest in the center. There, in that center, lies the eternal silence, the place where intuition is born, where every emotion dissolves back into light, where you finally remember you were never meant to carry the world. You were meant to illuminate it. You must understand something profound about this era we live in. It is not merely an age of information, but of psychic contagion. Humanity is more interconnected than ever, but not in spirit. In nervous systems, you feel the pulse of 1,000 unseen minds through the web of emotion. News, media, and thought, the collective unconscious, once hidden beneath myth and ritual, now spills unfiltered into everyday awareness. For the empath, this is a baptism and a curse. The collective shadow, that vast field of unintegrated human emotion, is alive. It vibrates through the atmosphere of thought, through the tension in cities, through the invisible circuits of the digital world. Every unhealed fear, every repressed desire, every act of avoidance sends ripples through the psychic sea. The sensitive ones, the empaths, become the canaries in the mine. You feel the anxiety before it manifests. You dream the storm before it breaks. This is not imagination. It is sensitivity to the archetypal field. The collective unconscious does not belong to one person. It is shared among all. When you feel sudden despair for no reason, when the weight of the world descends without warning, you are attuned to that field. But if you do not have psychic containment, if you have not built a vessel strong enough to hold what you perceive, you collapse under the pressure. The body, unable to differentiate between personal and collective pain, reacts as though the apocalypse has begun inside your chest. Containment is the forgotten art of the mystic. It is what allows the prophet to hear the cry of the world without losing sanity. It is what allows the healer to walk through darkness and emerge with light. Without it, empathy becomes possession by the collective shadow. You begin to act out the world's madness, confuse its fear for intuition, and mistake exhaustion for enlightenment. To develop containment, you must first recognize the symbolic nature of what you feel. The world's pain that enters you is not literal, it is mythic. When you feel an unexplainable heaviness, it may not be sadness, it may be the archetype of death moving through the collective, signaling transformation. When you sense panic in the air, it may not be your own anxiety, but the archetype of chaos asserting itself as civilization undergoes renewal. If you meet these forces with literal mind by personalizing them, you suffer. But if you meet them with symbolic awareness, you can transform them. The unconscious only overwhelms when we forget it speaks in symbols. It is like a dream, terrifying until understood. Divine, once translated, dreams, in fact, are the empaths' greatest teachers. They are nightly visitations from the archetypal world, messages from the deep sea of the collective. Many empaths dream of floods, crowds, or being lost in vast cities. These are not random images. They are representations of psychic inundation. The flood is emotion without boundary. The city is the collective mind. The loss of self within them shows how the psyche has merged too deeply with others. When these dreams appear, do not dismiss them as nightmares. They are mirrors. Write them down. Look at the symbols. Ask, what is this trying to tell me about my relationship to the collective? The unconscious is always attempting to restore equilibrium. The dream that terrifies you is also showing you how to heal. In alchemical terms, this is the nigredo, the blackening, the stage of dissolution. The empath must pass through it consciously. The old boundaries dissolve, chaos arises. The ego trembles, but from that darkness emerges a new vessel, the soul's crucible. It is here that containment is forged, not by resistance, but by transformation. You learn to hold paradox. You allow both your pain and the world's pain to exist without confusion. You say to the universe, I feel you, but I am not you. This is the alchemy of separation, the sacred act of differentiation that makes consciousness possible. In Solitude, this work deepens. Solitude is not an escape from others, but a return to your own psychic center. The empath fears solitude because it feels like abandonment, but it is the only condition under which the self can speak clearly. In the silence of solitude, the nervous system uncoils, the borrowed thoughts fall away. You begin to feel what is truly yours. You may feel grief at first, grief for all the energy you spent saving others, grief for the identity built around service, grief for the loss of roles that once defined your worth. Let it come. This is the ego dying into authenticity. The persona of the good empath, the one who never says no, must dissolve so that the true self can emerge. The alchemy of containment begins when you allow stillness to do what force never could. You stop trying to purify by effort and begin to purify by presence. The emotions rise and fall like waves, but you do not chase them. You let them break and recede. This non-reactivity is not apathy, it is mastery. The world's pain passes through you like wind through a temple, felt but not retained. You see, the nervous system of a conscious empath functions like sacred architecture. It has pillars and space. The pillars are your values, your practices, your understanding of the self. The space is your capacity to hold life without collapsing. Both are necessary. Without pillars, you fall into chaos. Without space, you suffocate. Every empath must become an architect of their own inner temple. Build pillars of ritual, meditation, prayer, creative expression, time in nature. These are not luxuries. They are the walls that keep your psyche from being flooded, build windows, symbolic awareness, humor, beauty, so that light can enter. Build, adore solitude that you can close when the world grows too loud. When you construct this inner temple, something miraculous happens. The collective no longer overwhelms you. You become a vessel of transmutation. You can feel global pain and still rest in peace. You can stand in a room full of anxiety and remain calm. You begin to emit coherence, and coherence heals others silently. You are no longer the sponge, you are the tuning fork that restores harmony. This is how the empath evolves into the mystic. You transcend emotional empathy and awaken symbolic empathy, the ability to perceive the meaning behind emotion, not just the emotion itself. You no longer feel for others. You feel with the archetype within them. You see the divine pattern moving through their suffering, and that vision itself becomes healing. But you must never forget, containment does not mean isolation. The self seeks relationship, for relationship is the mirror of individuation. When you interact from your center, your presence becomes medicine. You no longer seek to fix, but to witness. You look into another's eyes and hold them not with pity, but with recognition. I see the God in you, struggling to awaken. And at that moment, empathy becomes sacred sight. You perceive the archetype of resurrection behind despair, the archetype of transformation behind loss, the archetype of awakening behind pain. You no longer resist the darkness because you see what it conceals, light unborn. The empath who learns this secret becomes a midwife of consciousness. You help others birth awareness simply by being present in your own. You do not teach through words, you teach through energy. Your nervous system, once chaotic, now resonates with order, and this order communicates directly to others unconscious. This is the hidden reason why you were born sensitive, not to suffer endlessly, but to become a living instrument of balance between worlds. You are the bridge through which chaos returns to harmony, the channel through which unconscious material becomes visible. But the bridge must be strong. If it collapses, both sides fall into shadow. To maintain the strength, you must practice the small rituals of grounding. Breathe with the earth, feel your feet, remember your name. The unconscious loves the body. It anchors you in form. The more deeply you inhabit your body, the less you are swept into others. Spirit without body becomes fantasy. Empathy without embodiment becomes burnout. So learn to love your limits. They are not walls against love. They are forms through which love expresses itself safely. The ocean needs its shore, the fire its hearth, the self its boundaries. Without them, creation cannot exist. The nervous system, too, has its rhythm, expansion and contraction. Honor it. When you feel drained, withdraw without guilt. When you feel clear, connect without fear. The world does not need empaths who bleed. It needs empaths who glow, those who can feel the collective pain and still sing, those who can hold chaos and still dance, those who can walk through the valley of shadow and return with light. When you learn containment, you no longer return what isn't yours with resentment, but with reverence. You hand it back to the unconscious as an offering. You say, I have seen you, I have felt you, but I am not you. Go now and transform in your own time. And as you do, the nervous system exhales, the weight lifts, the self expands. You realize that empathy was never about feeling everything. It was about becoming so conscious that nothing could enslave your feeling again. There comes a moment in every inner journey when the river of emotion quiets and you begin to hear the faint murmur of eternity beneath it. It is not silence as the absence of sound, but silence as the presence of truth. This is where the empath finally begins to awaken into divine neutrality, the state of being fully present with everything, yet identified with nothing. In this neutrality, you no longer swing between extremes, rescuing or retreating, absorbing or avoiding, burning or freezing. You are no longer ruled by the nervous system's survival reflexes, but guided by the still compass of the self. You have crossed from emotional resonance into spiritual clarity, from sympathy into sacred seeing. This is what I call the union of shadow and self, the moment when the light no longer denies the dark, and the dark no longer resents the light. Let us speak now of this union, for it is the culmination of every empath's transformation. For so long, you believed that to be spiritual meant to stay pure, to banish negativity, to radiate endless compassion. But purity without shadow is brittle. It breaks at the first touch of reality. Real purity is not the absence of darkness, it is the ability to hold it without becoming it. When you integrate the shadow, you no longer fear your own anger, envy, or sadness. You recognize them as fragments of divine energy distorted by pain. You allow them to speak, to reveal their message. Anger may show you where you lost your boundaries. Envy may reveal the unlived potential of your soul. Sadness may point to love unexpressed. Every shadow contains instruction. To integrate is to listen. The empath's nervous system begins to heal when these inner voices are no longer suppressed. Each denied emotion creates static in the body, a field of unacknowledged tension. When you bring awareness to them, the static dissolves and energy flows freely again. The heart expands, the mind clears. You realize that your sensitivity was never the problem. Repression was for centuries. Mystics have misunderstood the shadow. They try to transcend it through denial, but denial is not transcendence, it is amnesia. The unconscious never disappears, it only changes form. It becomes the people you attract, the moods that seize you, the emotions that appear out of nowhere. What you call overload is often the return of what you have disowned. Thus, The final act of psychic healing is not rejection, but reconciliation, to sit in stillness and say to your shadow, I see you. You belong to me. This simple statement realigns the psyche. The self, once fragmented, begins to cohere. The inner child, once frightened, relaxes. The archetypes, once demanding, settle into balance. The nervous system, once overcharged, returns to rhythm. Divine neutrality emerges naturally from this integration. It is not indifference. It is radical empathy. Without identification, you feel deeply, but you are not lost in feeling. You understand, but you do not interfere. You love, but you do not bind. You exist as the silent witness through which the opposites reconcile. In this state, your intuition becomes something wholly different. It no longer warns or alarms, it simply reveals. You see not just what others feel, but why they feel it, the unconscious pattern beneath their behavior. You perceive with compassion, but you act with discernment. You can walk through the most chaotic field and remain undisturbed, not because you are detached, but because you are attuned to something deeper than emotion, the pulse of the self that underlies all things. The world, from this perspective, becomes symbolic. Every interaction, every energy you sense, every emotion that arises is a message from the self seeking integration. When someone projects anger toward you, you see the archetype of the warrior struggling to be acknowledged. When you encounter manipulation, you recognize the orphan child's desperate attempt to control love. You no longer react, you interpret. You read reality like a dream, each image revealing part of your own wholeness. This is what I meant when I said, who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens. The empath who looks inside no longer becomes the dream of others. You wake up from their stories. You cease to live as a mirror for everyone else's unconscious, and you begin to live as a mirror for the divine. But awakening is not the end. It is the beginning of conscious participation in life. You must now learn to live your empathy as service, not through sacrifice, but through presence. The true healer does not absorb wounds, they illuminate them. They walk into darkness and speak softly enough that the shadows remember they are also light. Your nervous system, once the battleground of the collective, becomes an instrument of peace. When you are calm, others' nervous systems entrain to yours. When you breathe consciously, the room exhales with you. This is not metaphor, it is biology infused with spirit. Coherence is contagious. A single conscious empath can restore balance to a space where many unconscious energies collide. This is the quiet power of divine neutrality. Do not underestimate the magnitude of such presence. It is not dramatic. It does not shout. It radiates. The most evolved empaths are often invisible. They do not seek attention because their work is subtle. They hold the psychic equilibrium of the world like invisible pillars, absorbing nothing yet, transforming everything through awareness alone. However, neutrality must not become avoidance. You are not here to float above life. You are here to live it fully, consciously, symbolically. When joy arises, let it move through you. When sorrow returns, let it teach you again. The difference now is that you know you are not these experiences. You are the awareness in which they unfold, and so the empath becomes a mystic. The mystic becomes a servant of the self, and the self becomes a vessel of the divine. This is the evolution hidden inside your sensitivity. What once felt like weakness was the seed of wisdom. What once felt like burden was initiation. What once felt like pain was preparation for awakening. In my time, I said that there is no coming to consciousness without pain. Yet once consciousness blooms, pain becomes instruction rather than punishment. You no longer resist it. You use it as guidance, a signpost pointing toward what still seeks reconciliation. The empath who masters this transforms pain into prophecy. You begin to sense the direction of humanity's evolution not through thought, but through feeling purified of distortion. You feel when the collective heart is heavy, but you no longer mistake it for your own. You feel when truth is approaching and you open your mind to receive it. You feel when chaos is near and you anchor presence into the world. This is what it means to be empathic in the age of awakening, not to absorb, but to stabilize. I once wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. For the empath, this means becoming both bridge and boundary, both channel and container, both light and shadow. When you accept these paradoxes, you embody wholeness. You become, in alchemical terms, the lapis philosophorum, the philosopher's stone, that mysterious consciousness that transmutes suffering into wisdom, lead into gold. You will know you have reached this stage when the world's noise no longer fragments you, and the silence within you feels larger than any storm. You will notice that others seek your presence, not because you solve their problems, but because they feel sane near you. You have become coherence incarnate living, proof that peace is possible amidst chaos. And when you dream again, the symbols will change. No longer floods and crowds, but clear lakes, mountains, stars. The unconscious has recognized your mastery. You are no longer lost in the dream. You are co-creating it. So I say to you now, return what is not yours. Not with anger, but with blessing. Return it to the divine sea from which it came. Say quietly in your heart, all that belongs to the collective. I release to the collective all that belongs to me. I integrate in love all that belongs to God. I trust to God. When the nervous system will sigh, the heart will open, the soul will rest. You have completed the circle from absorption to awareness, from overwhelm to mastery, from emotional empathy to divine neutrality. Now walk gently in the world, feel everything, but hold nothing. See through others, but stay within yourself. Love deeply, but release freely. This is the path of the awakened empath, not to flee the world's pain, but to witness it without losing your light. For when the world grows dark, it is not more light we need, it is steadier souls. And you, my friend, are one of them.